Hello, everyone. I'm here with Eve Stafford, who has an Order of Australia medal for her work here in far north Queensland, working with community arts, community cultural arts development. We've probably got a lot of versions of that, haven't we, Eve, over the decades? Received a 2-year fellowship from the Australia Council for the Arts to investigate the different types of regional arts service delivery and even going as far as British Columbia to compare our region with universal challenges of delivering arts to regional communities. I am very honoured to be sitting here with the founder of Arts Nexus and the initiating, curating editor of the Arts Nexus magazine, which we're going to talk about today. Hi, Eve. Yeah, good?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. You will hear lots of background noise, listeners. I'm sitting in the most beautiful rainforest backdrop. There are animals, birds, there could be rain, and we're just having a relaxed chat.
And it's the wet season,
It's the wet season. Very wet, very steamy. So
monsoon.
let's hope the sweat doesn't get into the equipment. So we got this incredible magazine to talk about. It's 65 editions of the published magazine. There are about 17 of the initial ones that were more like a newsletter that then grew up into an actual printed magazine. And it went over at least, well, we think 10, perhaps 14 years, depends when you want to start the countdown. And it was an amazing time at that particular period in time in arts in far north Queensland. And we're going to talk to Eve about why you went and gave up almost 15 years of your life to not just the organisation, but this magazine in particular. So,
Well, you have to remember that it wasn't until 1995 that there was a built art gallery in Cairns or a built university campus in Cairns. And it was around that time that there were a lot of things starting to form and change in Cairns as it started to grow up and mature following its opening of the international airport in 1984, which made us a small global city on the edge of the Asia Pacific rather than the end of the line from Brisbane.
yeah, and just a place you go fishing.
Yep.
Yeah. So then, when did you come to far north Queensland? Where's your timing?
I came to far north Queensland in 1968.
And what were you doing at that time?
I was living in a tent for 2 years at Holloway Beach before we bought land in Kuranda in 1970 and built our own house. And that's the house we're sitting in right now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And your work at the time then, you were creative?
Yes, we had a screen printing business at home, a cottage industry, and we were making screens and doing markets. So we were doing the designs in the wet season, and we would cull all the designs that hadn't worked very well one year and do them and replace them the following year. And we did 17 years of markets.
Wow.
With our own screens. We've got hundreds of screens.
And that's really here in the famous Kuranda markets.
Yes, the Kuranda markets, the Cairns markets as well at Rusty's.
Wow. So you would have been part of that very early pioneer days of tourism as well, when it really sparked up.
Yes, that's correct, because again, 1984 was when the international airport opened.
Right.
And things really took off after that.
Yeah, for sure. So alongside that, I'm also aware there's a Kuranda Amphitheatre where a lot of arts, theatre, performance, productions, cabarets.
I was very involved in the amphitheatre from the beginning. And I also, during the 80s, put on spring festivals and did some touring, brought some touring artists from the UK, like Roger Woodward, and brought Lockhart River dancers down and various other things that I hosted at the Kuranda Amphitheatre, as well as looking after having a stint at running the bar, the kitchen, and I did the promotion for all of the 80s until 91.
Yeah. Wow.
including having a column in the paper. So I was doing photography, and I was taking the photos down by hand because there was no internet to Cairns Post to get published after concerts at the Crown Amphitheatre on a Sunday.
Wow. Okay, so this is really interesting for you, the listener, to hold on to. Eve, you've come from a very cross art form practice,
Yes,
visual arts yourself, photographer, journalism, writing, and then also working with a community based organisation, the amphitheatre, and just,
yes, community built it was.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, very much. And to this day it exists, right?
yes, it still is. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
non-profits. Yeah.
non-profits. So,
Although I did get frustrated with the amphitheatre and started an arts council branch with a couple of other ladies from here. 4 of us actually. We were called the Gang of 4. We did an arts council branch because not all of the arts were covered at the amphitheatre, and we wanted to explore some of the others, and we had a very successful branch.
right.
So that was also a good grounding in how to make things happen.
And we were a very long way away up here from the main industry, which would have been Brisbane, or was there anything else up the coast?
Well, that's the other thing that frustrated me was that we would get artists sent out to us, ignoring everyone local, sometimes who were more experienced than those sent out to us,
Yeah.
because nobody knew they were here.
Yeah.
And so I got really interested in trying to get what I call the cross weave from all of that access and touring model from Brisbane.
Yeah.
You know, we were meant to be grateful.
Yes.
And we were going to be eternal volunteers and not
Yeah.
have a professional practice.
Right. And so this would be a whole nother episode, but then you went from that Arts Council into forming an actual not-for-profit organisation called Arts Nexus that is still existing to this day.
Yeah.
And again, that's another whole episode. But
there was a little step in between.
yes.
With the Arts Council, we wanted to start our own Kuranda newspaper, and they said no from Brisbane. So it was all run, the Queensland Arts Council was all run from Brisbane, and they had the power of it. So we closed the branch while we had nearly 300 members.
Right.
Because it wasn't serving our direct needs.
Yeah. And so that is the challenge across, let's just keep it localised to Australia, but to deliver regionally, you are often beholden to the main city.
That's correct.
That's the capital or not.
Yeah. Yes, I used to say that, if New York was the centre of the artistic universe, Sydney was on the side, and then Sydney thought it was the navel of Australia, and then Brisbane started to create Queensland organisations without any idea how to serve the regions.
Yes, right.
And so all the decisions were made in Brisbane, and part of the organisation was that we challenged that model and said, we want to have professional practice here and we want to face the Asia Pacific.
Yeah. And of course, you come from somewhere else in 68. Where was that?
Melbourne. I've done nursing, so that's where you get organisation skills.
Yes, you do. You always want a nurse somewhere in your life. So that idea with Cairns or far north Queensland, Kuranda, wherever, a lot of people have come from somewhere else with exposure to opportunities and ideas and ways that you can do things. And so, they forget that too in the big city.
Well, it's a very do-it-yourself community as well, and Kuranda in particular. I mean, it started the Kuranda markets when markets were new, when there were no markets on a Sunday.
Yeah.
There were no shops open on a Sunday. There were no pubs open on a Sunday. So we had the markets in the morning and the Kuranda Amphitheatre in the afternoon on a Sunday. And we cleaned up because everyone wanted to come to Kuranda from the whole region and put it on the map.
Yeah, and still.
As a day destination.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we're going to skip forward. You started to obviously be in information, providing information to the Cairns Post, disseminating information to people, and then you started a newsletter.
Yes, I think there's some graphics also from the T-shirts, if you think about that as a media.
Yes.
And then the photojournalism for the newspapers, the Tablelands newspaper and the Cairns Post in the main. And so it was pretty logical that I would end up doing a lot more writing and photography and publishing.
Yes. So then I'm trying to picture you at that time. You're probably young with a lot of energy. You probably had some colleagues. Okay, listeners, you will hear some heavy rain. It's coming down now, but we will persist because I don't think we can control the rain. We can control a lot of things, but not the rain. So if you had people around you, the amphitheatre, yourself, you had some obviously aspirations. Tell me what that looked like then. Were there people meeting, ideas being swapped? Like, how did it look?
Well, the pilots' dispute had a big effect on tourism up here. Everything dropped 40%. And so there was a chance to do other things and look at other things a little bit. So the newspaper was much smaller and I couldn't get into it as easily. And yeah, so I suppose I was just casting around in my spare time, outside of the 7-day-a-week business of the T-shirts. In the end, I was doing more for the arts.
Yep.
I was having trouble fitting in the day job.
Yeah, that would be a common story in the arts, I suspect. And so you then obviously formed a group, FNCICA, is that right?
FNCIA. What happened was that, again, trying to create a focus for the creative industries in the far north where there could be a professional outcome and self-reliance, we got involved with an economic study on the creative industries in far north in 1996 with state development. So that was putting an economic focus on the industry itself. And out of that, we had a very good partnership with state development over a number of years. State development were interested in us because we were calling it a business, the business of arts and culture. So that's what the magazine was as well. And so they were interested in us and what we were doing on an economic growth basis. This is at the same time as Richard Florida is going off about creative industries, and also Johnno Hawkes with the fourth pillar that was presenting at the international conferences in Rio, I think it was.
Okay, so
he's an Australian, by the way.
Who's
Johnno
that?
Hawkes is an Australian who wrote the fourth pillar, which culture was the fourth pillar of sustainability, in that it kept together economic, environmental and social life and made sense of them. And what could be more important than making sense? Those other things stood alone, and it was arts and culture that brought them together into meaning.
I'm wondering if you remember, that was our very first time working together, actually, Eve, was on the Creative Industries 2002 or 3. We put together a little database, and yeah, you went to a conference, spoke at that, I remember.
Yes, there was an international conference in creative industries and I was one of the speakers, but we also ran a cluster of IT, film and television, advertising, media, the broader knowledge-based industries.
Yep. And then JCU picked it up as a thread in terms of tropical innovation. There was another conference.
Yes. We had a tropical innovation festival, a couple of them as well, in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were working really at a few levels then, from what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Once with government, state development, economics, and then there's the artist at the heart.
I'm trying to connect the ground with the top. I'm trying to provide that avenue to have input into policy and also to have endowment from government to foster and generate arts at grassroots level. Yeah.
Okay, so then you mentioned the magazine, which is, of course, what we're here to talk about. Is that the platform that you got to really emphasize this advocacy you were doing around that?
Well, we're doing arts and cultural development, and one of the key things is access to information, because information is power, and if you give it to people, they can all take whatever step they need to take if they've got that at their fingertips. So that was the beginning, and it happened when Carrie Bies was the arts officer at the Tanks Arts Centre. She was based at the Tanks Arts Centre, which she founded actually. She climbed over the fence with the architect and founded it. Not very many people know that. But when she was operating at the Tanks, she asked me in to look at a sort of a tabletop full of brochures that people kept dropping off there, you know, about this was on and that was on, and some of them were from Brisbane, some of them were from locals. And she said, what do I do with all these itty-bitty bits of paper? And I said, oh, you create a newsletter, put them in a newsletter in one publication. So that's why it started as a newsletter, was to collate all the information people were trying to reach others with.
Sounds so simple these days, right? Newsletter, e-news, information, disseminate. Like we do that in our sleep these days. It's everywhere. So can you describe to me a little bit of the environment at the time? Obviously, it was a little bit more word of mouth and what you saw at the local shop on the front window.
Yeah.
So
Well,
where did you get that idea around a newsletter? That it wouldn't have been a normal thing back then, right?
Well, you know, it was in print form. There was no internet at that point. And first of all, it was just the collation of the information that was there. And then there was the impetus to actually start to seek it out and to be more proactive than reactive in what was being lobbed in these little brochures and leaflets at the Tanks. There was also the what council called the six-pack, and the six-pack was you know, the Civic Theatre, Graft'N'Arts, the youth division, that was Graft'N'Arts, the gallery that had just opened in 95. So they wanted to promote things that they had on, and only had the Cairns Post or radio to get that out, but not anything directly for the dedicated audience that would be the people who make and watch and, you know, receive and consume the arts as they are.
So you're saying the first newsletter as such was like a what's on guide of what was coming up.
There was always a reason to promote what was coming up, and by and large they were tours from elsewhere, from Brisbane largely. But then there was the beginning of Jute and of Kick Arts, and Kick Arts was actually conceived, its name, as Kick Ass, because they were trying to deliberately challenge traditional art, traditional visual art, landscapes and portraits. And so they had a show to start that off, which I reviewed, the Fish John West Regrets, before the gallery was even open. And when we started to have a more broad discussion about the rest of the arts, that was when we decided to develop the FNCIA, Far North Creative Industries Association. Politically, there was a change of government at local level in the 90s that affected the Tanks Arts Centre. Suddenly it was defunded to a large degree, and the publication that I was doing out of it also defunded. That prompted us to call a meeting of various heads that we could identify from all the different art forms, and to begin to meet to strategically work out how we were going to survive. And that became the FNCIA, on purpose, the Far North Cultural Industry Association, and that was the forerunner of Arts Nexus. We called the magazine Arts Nexus because that's what it was. It was creating a nexus or web of connection, and eventually the organisation became Arts Nexus as well.
So this is interesting. So the newsletter started and had been done very much in partnership with the council arts officer. And from that, it grew up knowing that still information being disseminated was really important. Was it important to start an organisation to do that magazine, or did you just see a need for the organisation? Like it's so.
We saw a need for a non-profit that couldn't be at the whim of political cycles to
Right.
come and go, and to also have the freedom to work cross-border and not be dictated to.
Okay, so you brought together the meeting of stakeholders to discuss this
We were actually
challenge.
meeting at the tanks. We had
That's
our first
strategic.
meetings at the tanks, and I saw a list of people here, the committee members on this newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
And we also included Innisfail, so we had Johnson Shire, and we had Indigenous in it with Narelle Boys, and we also had cultural diversity and youth, craft, theatre, design, venues and touring with Phil Finkelstein from the Civic Theatre, and we had arts education as well with Bill Spooner. I was president. Carrie, the arts officer, was vice president. Bill Spooner from Arts Education was the secretary, and Jane Rybars was the treasurer, and she was an accountant. So we were heading off to being a fully fledged non-profit.
Wow. But this is the initial stage. It's in a printed form newsletter where you're capturing this. So there's this lovely opportunity where we now are bringing these out of the archives to find.
Yep.
And I also believe that Julia Liu was the arts officer at Douglas Shire, and she was the first member of this organisation.
Yes,
Group.
she was instrumental,
Mm.
particularly in regard to RADF and so forth. Yeah,
Which is the
but
Regional
outside
Arts
of Cairns,
Development
being
Fund.
outside of being Cairns-centric.
Yeah.
But see, the very next thing was to deal with our own strategic plan.
Yeah.
So on the very next page, we're talking with our strategic plan, and we're talking to the State Arts Office, and we're talking about proposed F&CIA projects. 1, information services and coordination.
Number one.
Okay.
So it goes hand in hand, and it's very difficult to take one away from the other and just look at the magazine in isolation. But these early newsletters were kind of reporting this development.
They were a coordinating tool for information.
Yeah.
That was number 1. Number 2 was audience development and marketing.
Well, I was going to say there's also recruitment going on there too, of trying to pull towards you like-minded people interested in this very topic, right?
And so we actually had an audience development and marketing subcommittee. And then we wanted business and professional development and training. So we started to develop plans around that. And then we wanted planning and research. And that brings into play our influence on policy and decision making that affected us.
Yeah, right. And so this is then where you start getting the community development aspect, where you're speaking up to government and back down to the community.
Yes, we were the we were the linchpin between the practitioner, isolated at home, nowhere to actually even make stuff, and government departments. Not only state development, but Department of Community Services was another one that we were invested in meeting with regularly.
Right. And so through the magazine, well, at this stage, let's call it the newsletter. What's the second newsletter? Can you see that there? Then obviously there starts to become a bit of a groundswell around these things. you start getting people more and more interested, wanting to take advantage of this?
We
What
also
happens?
wanted to value add to the state arts services, the Queensland this and the
Right.
Queensland that didn't really have a foothold up here at all.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you're talking about the isolated practitioner. What sort of information were they looking for? Was it art form, like how to do things, or what were they missing that their counterparts in the city as an individual would have got?
We had no means of dialogue with each other.
Ah, the dialogue.
Yes, so it became a platform for people to discuss the ideas that were
Yeah,
central to their work. And there were a few values that I put into it that I could articulate. One of them was that we were not going to have a star system where we just went and celebrated the stars. We were trying to do grassroots, and so we were always aiming at the periphery
yeah,
because the centre takes care of itself.
yeah.
And so that's why we were interested in the region wide. That's why we were interested in the underdeveloped areas of the creative industries, like writing, which we found out was underdeveloped
Yes.
in the region, and potentially still is, and tried to bring them into the fold with ideas.
Yes.
And the ideas I tried very hard to make it seamless between imported product, which we traditionally had under the access and touring model, and locally generated product. So doing the magazine, I was trying to put them side by side without hierarchy.
Yeah.
And doing the same with art form as well, not prioritising anything, not prioritising the stars and the people, but prioritising the creative idea so that that creative idea could be picked up and put into another art form
Yeah,
by
right.
anyone. So the whole idea is that it's just putting resources into the hands of the creatives to work out what their next step is.
Yeah, right.
Who to contact, who to follow, this is all before social media.
Exactly. People
So,
have no idea, right, what it was like. Yeah.
what to go and watch, what to go
Yeah.
and see.
Yeah.
Who to join.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just a connector.
The connector.
And to create dialogue with the purpose of building a self-identified sector in the region.
Yeah.
A creative sector that was in dialogue with each other.
Yeah. So you're also then trying to capture like a time capsule each quarter, kind of what was happening at that time. So this is where I can see as we start getting into the magazine that not everything was projecting forward and advertising. Some of it was critical review, reflection of each other, what was going on, but also what was going on nationally on the political
Yes, I wanted to
scene.
connect people into the bigger picture straight up
Right.
as well. So with the early part of the magazine, I would generally have any news. There's going to be an election and there's an arts policy, followed by previews, and this is cross art form. And the previews again would be seamless between local production and touring production. The previews were because when you first open the magazine, that's marketing. You want to go, so and then in the middle I had the calendar, but then eventually it got too full to actually print in the middle. And then after that I would have reviews, and I would commission reviews in various art forms. I'd often say to people, I'd like you to review this art show or this performance or this play. And they'd say, oh, I've never done that before. And I said, oh, I think you're the perfect person to do it. So I would be very keen to identify the people that I thought could do that and then to print that. And in the end, that gave a lot of people CV. When they then put in a grant, they had a review of their last show. And that was
Ah,
very important in them winning
yeah,
funding.
yeah. And also, I'd imagine even with your graphic layout, and you talked before about your experience with the graphic t-shirts design, all of some people have to start bringing up their own graphic design to even compete against the others. And so you're skill developing the sector
Well, then
through this
that's what actually
magazine.
followed. What followed the previews was industry news, and that
Industry.
included workshops and training and grants and all of the things that was going to fuel it. So that was more like, that's not the knowledge that you want the general public to read. You want the general public will handle the first half of the magazine fine because that's marketing all the shows.
Yep.
The really, the ones that really want to beaver away,
Yeah.
they will go all the way to the end and find out how to make it happen.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I can see that too again in the other papers that came out of the magazine. It seems like you would feature certain articles. Now, I imagine some of these occasional papers, they were to do with, like, there was a playwrights conference, public art and community cultural development. There's even one on insurance, an update. Well, that became a thing all of a sudden, risk management, and definitely things like you mentioned before with the John Hawks and the Fourth Pillar conference. Then there's a creative industries. I think you and I went to that conference actually in Melbourne. We were at that. It's amazing, the Memories Cultural Development Network. And
Yes. Well, some of the occasional papers are to do with happenstance. For example, Jude having a national conference here,
right.
and some of them, or a visit by John Hawkes from Melbourne, even though he has influenced international cultural policy.
Yeah.
Through Rio and all that. And some of them were other visitors, like the future of the book came out of another publisher who came here, and we had a long discussion about the future of the book. And that's at a time where everyone's thinking, "Oh, it's all going to be digital in future. There'll be no books." Ha ha ha!
And
We
now
know a
we're
bit now, don't we? We can read back and see if he was right.
yeah, well, also, and I think this is the amazing thing because I obviously come from a book background where I like to hold a book in my hand. But I'm reading here with the future of the book, the delegates came from all around the world. This is 2003. Then it's hard to explain how, and maybe you've got a better way of putting it into words. The thread between that, the Tropical Writers Group, the Cairns Tropical Writers Festival, then cut forward to you being on this translators group, international,
Yeah, Asia
and
Pacific Writers and
right,
Translators. So I was the secretary for 5 years.
right, and therefore, and that's recent.
That's recent, yeah.
And then you were awarded by the Queensland Writers Centre for your contribution to writing in Queensland.
Yeah, the Johnno Award.
The Johnno Award. And we don't even know if they knew about this 10 years body of work through the magazine, but I can see you developing through those contributors, supporting their work to get published, then sometimes pulling that out into an occasional paper to put a spotlight onto it.
Well, if it was a world trend,
Yes.
there's some things in the occasional papers that are signalling world trend.
Wow.
And so again, I'm trying to get over that New York, Sydney, Brisbane Milky Way.
The Milky Way.
We're in the Milky Way.
Yeah.
No, we're not in the Milky Way.
Yeah.
We're at the centre of our own universe.
Well, and that's right.
And that's what we're trying to do.
And you mentioned too before about sort of gazing towards the Pacific rather than south.
Yes,
Looking.
we're a cosmopolitan global city on the edge of the Asia-Pacific Rim.
Yeah, wow. That sounds like you've said that a few times.
I have said that a few times. That's the aspiration of not being at the end of the line.
Yeah.
And not getting, sent out things as if we all should be grateful and eternally bow down.
So now,
and that led to my fellowship, of course.
What was your fellowship in? The
my
topic?
Well, it was again to do with FNCI and Arts Nexus. We had the state bodies, the Queensland Writers Centre, Queensland Crafts Council, Artisan, Q Music, we found out there were 43 of them, all based in Brisbane. Community Arts Network was another.
Yeah.
We had a person up here who was connected to Ausdance. I was connected to the Writers' Centre because I did some time on the board, again from complaining that they were all Brisbane-centric. Me and someone else from Arts West were on the board for a while in the 90s. What we wanted to do was to help them get their news out of Brisbane and accessible to our region better than they could.
Yes.
And that was another big impetus for the information to be put in front of everybody. So we created liaisons with the state services bodies, and we actually held a meeting at Arts Queensland with them, and state development's on the floor above. Yeah. And we pulled them all together into one room, and they hadn't met each other.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
We're trying to get coordination up here on an almost voluntary basis.
Yeah.
They said, "Oh, where's state development?" Because we were working with state development. I said, "Upstairs." This is in Brisbane.
They didn't even know.
We flew ourselves down.
Yeah, right.
You know, we put money in ourselves, Carrie and I, in those days.
So do you think that, I know from the organisation point of view, you were definitely advocating right up, and from that example of even pulling themselves together to alert them to some challenges. Was the magazine instrumental in that? Were you advocating through the pages, do you think?
Yes, if they had something to offer, I would give them space.
I mean the other way. So you're, on one hand, you are, what they say, amplifying the government messages, giving them space, and certainly if they funded
well, the other thing was that there were no modems in computers in those days. So I applied to the Gambling Community Benefit Fund to get 10 modems. And I gave one to each of the people who were instrumental in each art form. For example, the Ausdance person, and me was the Writers' Centre, and Jute, and some of the players around in different art forms. We all got a modem so that we could connect with head office in Brisbane, and also we could connect with each other. So there were two different networks there. To kick that off, we started an e-news, an e-bulletin. It was called e-bulletin to begin with, and then e-news. And it was the second only in Queensland to take place within the arts that came out of us having external modems for the first time in history. That's what happened.
Well, that's a critical thing. And there's one thing to have the desire and the need, but then you've actually just got to have the hardware to really do it.
Yeah.
And it was at a time where emails and information being disseminated, was a very new thing.
Yes, it was a new thing.
Yes.
And almost nobody had websites either in those days.
Exactly.
There was hardly any websites.
Right. And so you're dealing with being in a context of Cairns being sort of elevated up to be this international destinational
Well, we
place.
wanted to be early adopters. If you're an early adopter, you're not frightened. I mean, same with AI.
Yeah.
I'm using AI in various forms, visually and other ways, because being an early adopter, I won't be afraid.
Yeah.
Because I'll understand what I'm doing and I'll see all the dangers. It's just another platform vehicle, for good and bad.
Yeah. And having known you now about 25 years, apparently, I'm not sure if we could do the numbers, but I've always seen you ahead of the game. Is that what was happening for you personally as well? Like, you've got a lot of big ideas coming forward. You're pushing boundaries. You're getting a publication to happen in a very remote region where I don't even know where you printed it. We'll talk about that in a moment. But also just pulling all of this information together. Can you describe to me what that was like for you, being the the editor, the commissioning editor of a magazine, even in its early form as a newsletter?
Well, I was always working from home for a start.
Right.
The magazine, I put the magazine together down to every full stop on my desk. So it was just me doing all of the pages and layout. First of all in PageMaker, which got superseded by InDesign in the Adobe suite. So yes, I became more and more proficient in the use of PageMaker and InDesign in that process. Again, early adopter.
Well, I even saw the physical form of you would carry around with you the folder where you'd printed off the pages into a plastic foolscap pocket, and that meant you could move them around a little bit, but also see where the gaps were or whatever. And and it was quarterly, so you would almost be working on the next one while you still in the
It
printing
became a
process.
quarterly. It meant that I was constantly observing what everyone was doing, including in Brisbane, everything that was on at QPAC, everything that was on at the Powerhouse,
Yeah.
and sometimes going down to see if I could go to some of those things from time to time. But also I did have a stint on the Australia Council as well.
That's the Australia Council for the
For the arts. Yes, I had a 3-year stint on the community cultural development part of the Australia Council, which gave me a national overview. And I must say that was a blessing because I also saw all the grants coming in from all over the country as well. And I could see what everyone was doing across the nation in the community cultural development space. I also got appointed to the first board of the Playing Australia.
Yes.
Which is the national arts touring body that came out of Canberra, actually, the government. So I had meetings over in Canberra with them. I was the Queensland rep for that. So that also gave me an insight into touring. And what I could see there was that the touring was basically swinging between Perth and Brisbane and back again. There was almost nothing coming above what I used to call the Brisbane line. And I would, so there would be discussions with people about, they came to Brisbane, the rest of the board. We met in Brisbane one day and they said, oh, well, you're from Queensland. Where's a good place to eat?
Like you'd know.
And I took out a map of Australia and bent it at the Brisbane line to show them that where I lived was in Bass Strait. And the rest of the Cape York was almost touching Antarctica. Like they just got no idea of the size of Queensland.
And I think we still struggle to this
and
day.
We've got the provincial city up the coast, like a necklace.
But we still struggle with this. The population base is really small, to be fair, and so we've got this
Far North
regional
Queensland's got more people than all of Northern Territory.
Yeah.
And it's got, I can't remember exactly, but roughly half of Tasmania.
But statistically,
it hasn't got state services. They were all concentrated in Brisbane, 1,600 kilometres away.
Yeah, and that's changed now. We do have branches and things here now. So so I'm going to guess through a lot of your advocacy, I can see evidence through this magazine, the very early days of the dance and First Nation arts. You did a lot to feature First Nation.
Yes.
Was that a thing of government at the time, or were you ahead of that?
No, it had come out of being in Kuranda, where, I think probably when I first came here was probably 40% of the population were Indigenous in Kuranda. And the Kuranda Amphitheatre, when we started it, we would have touring bands come through, but the support band was always Mantaka.
Yeah.
For the first few years.
Still to this day.
Still to this day. I took their photo, did their promotions, and so, and featured them. So the amphitheatre became a village green where people cross-culturally could be together.
Yeah.
because in town you couldn't. The picture theatre was segregated.
Mm.
The bottom pub was segregated. And so that was quite new.
Yeah, living memory, right. That's interesting. See, it's not in the history
So
books.
yes, so just again making it seamless. It's all about the creative ideas.
And so now here we are cut forward, and the government now has a big investment in First Nation arts with the Cairns Indigenous Arts Fair, Bullamajar Arts Centre, residencies where there's 4 companies there. We've got the Indigenous fashion coming forward.
All the same, Queensland was 30, 40 years behind Northern Territory.
Yeah,
Which is why people thought dot painting was
was the
Australia-wide.
thing. So again,
So it was a very slow to get on that bandwagon and catch
yeah.
up. And first of all, we had Rosalind Kemp, and then we had Johnno Award.
Yeah. January, our current president,
Yes,
she's still
14
around.
years at Arts Queensland, so she was very instrumental in that.
Yeah, very. I'm looking at the magazines, and there's also an amazing array of images that have been selected for the front cover and the back cover, which is a time capsule in itself. And I'm really looking forward to the exhibition, maybe an exhibition of covers. But you, as a photographer and having that photojournalism background, first of all, do you have a favourite? Do you remember a standout favourite?
No, I haven't got a favourite, but quite often they're my own photos, like an Indigenous face like that.
Like what? Which one's that one?
Would be my own photos.
So that's come from a festival. There was a
Yes.
dancer from PNG, I think. And
Yes, and the other one of Zenith, that was another one.
yeah.
So yes, so I'm at concerts photographing.
And there's artwork I can see. So a lot of the
Yes,
images,
Torres Strait artwork.
some would have been provided by the.
Well, the big companies always give you plenty.
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes you put it on because you're also, particularly further along, you're trying to mainstream
Yeah.
this art. People say, oh, so you might put something that's touring on the cover, like Circus Oz or something.
Well, you weren't trying to sell this magazine, were you? You didn't have a commercial impetus to make sure you
I was trying to
reached
sell
off.
tickets so that the arts were surviving.
So that comes in again, that
Yeah, the
bigger picture,
marketing
the
and
advocacy.
promotion.
Yeah, right. And also, like you just said, legitimizing the arts to the broader community
Mhm.
through these magazines. That even though the target would have been I know because I was one of the ones that would have to pack these magazines into the old school plastic pockets with the labels, print off the labels. And so there was about 2,000 labels, I think, at one point where we would post it out to stakeholders across the country, always to the libraries, then to the membership, and then there was subscribers that were perhaps just interested people or audience.
Yes, some of them would get it free. For example, I would send it to the Queensland Writers Centre and the Queensland Crafts Council so that they were seeing what we were doing too.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was advocacy back to the city.
But you never sold the magazine itself.
No,
There's no prices on any of the covers.
You'll see quite a lot of the covers are promoting local arts.
Yeah.
I haven't worked out to quantify, what the proportions are, but I'm trying to promote local arts in the main and make people feel proud to be on the cover, even if next time it's the Queensland Orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. And I can see there's a fairly even spread across all the art forms and all the organisations, and there are individual practitioners that do heavily feature, and some of them are now past, but were very popular at the time. And I think definitely, yeah, I just think thank you, credit to you for that. Now I want to understand a little bit more about your selection process, right? The curation, the choices you would have had to make all the time about who to feature, what to say, what's not to say. Was there, before you go into describing that, was there anything that you had to decide not to put into the magazine that may have been controversial or
No,
No.
I didn't have anything that was preventing me from putting something in I wanted
Yeah, right.
to, and that was part of being a non-profit
Right.
because you're at arm's length from government. Because what I'd seen from government by that time was that with the cycles of politics, there is an urge by the incoming governments to what I call kill off the babies of predecessors, you know, kill off the offspring of predecessors. And that creates a lot of stop, start stuff. So to be a non-profit with funding that we did get from 3 levels of government eventually, and we had to change policy for that because there was no place for us as a regional organisation to begin with. That wasn't foreseen.
So the funding for them, so
And
that's
that
how
gave
you
us some
paid,
freedom.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're an independent, not for profit,
Yeah.
not
And
non-government
yeah.
organisation. Yeah.
So we wanted to be agile and not be at the whim of any one level of government or any one change of government, because that's, you know, so many schemes you hear, oh, it's a pilot scheme. Well, they fail to refuel the bloody plane
Yeah.
next time.
Yeah.
You know, I've just been so dashed.
How did you actually pay for the printing then? So you would have been printing how many editions every time?
I can't remember,
Well, it's
but it's at least
at
2,000.
least 2,000 that I remember. And that might not have been all of them. It would have built up to that for sure. But how did you pay for the printing, the hard costs? Because I can imagine you gave a lot of unpaid hours to this.
Grants, yeah.
And so those grants were also tied into the organisation being funded.
Yes, to a degree. I mean, the budgets were set out what was for what when you applied.
Right, and
Yeah.
so the magazine would have been one of their key performance indicators in the grants.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm interested in the logistics as a business model, really, of then how did it stop? Like,
How did it stop?
what was the main reason for its ceasing publication?
Changes in the board
Right.
of Arts Nexus. There are a couple of points in history where we appeared to get off mission. You know, I mean, I've got a board. I mean, I'm president to begin with, and then I'm the executive officer answering to a board. The board can take it in any direction. I don't have any say, apart from giving them advice as the president. So that can be tricky, and at times, and then you have a change of personnel at the board, a change of ideas, and a change of mission. You know, because some people were very pro art form, for example, not cultural development, not community cultural development, only for professionals. You know, you'll get people that'll say, oh, why don't you just concentrate on the professionals?
Yeah.
Well, how do they get professional unless they have all the steps in between? It's sort of like, you know, at the show where you've got the dolls on the top shelf, but the other shelves are all there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting. I think for the case of this, understanding that the magazine came first, from that the organisation, then all of the funding was linked very intrinsically with the actual magazine output. And so when that changed and the organisation changed, then a new magazine newsletter form came back out, which of course then was not really accepted because it was kind of a bit old school by then to have no pictures or, you know, the beautiful photographic.
There was just a change in personnel.
Yeah, and that happens. Everything has a season, as we like to say,
Yeah,
and the season came to an
Are you
end.
going to? Is it going to go back to its mission? Because its mission, in many instances, when we did strategic planning again and again and again, the mission was consistent.
Yeah.
It didn't much change
No.
in terms of its essence.
Yeah. And certainly it seems that for me, and in my experience, once the magazine ceased, it was almost like the organisation stopped being seen as well. So they kind of went hand in hand. But then I'm wondering the people contained in the pages, how they felt about not having this platform of promotion and conversation, uh, where that might have had impact. Did it slow things down? Did new things come instead? What do you think?
I don't think that the sector is in dialogue anymore.
Right.
I think the sector was in a reasonable shape of internal dialogue when the magazine was operative, and I think it's become fragmented again,
Yeah.
both in art form and regionally.
Yeah.
We've now gone back to a much more of a concentration on Cairns,
Yeah.
not the
Far
far
North
North Queensland
Queensland.
and all the shires,
Yeah.
and all the way up to the Torres Strait, which is what we were representing. We were representing the ABS region of the far north, which tourism called the tropical north.
Yes.
They changed the name, but it's still an ABS region called the far north. So that was our focus.
I'm interested in this word dialogue through a printed page, and you have made that point in a couple of different ways. We're now in this post-COVID era where we were pushed online, and everyone's now resisting this online dialogue, and everyone's craving back to the face-to-face dialogue, and we talk about that a lot in community. So you say dialogue, and yet I think about the formal process of writing. You're kind of a bit more well behaved, aren't you? More structured in what you're going to say. Your critical review would be considered different than the conversation you might have privately on the side of the road, because of this space in the publishing world being public. It's reportable. It's you can quote it and point to it. What's your thoughts about the public space aspect of a printed magazine that allows you to have dialogue?
In this day and age,
Well, at all, yeah.
there is, there are all those mini conversations that happen between me and a reviewer, and the reviewer then has to be further engaged in the production of whatever it is to understand what they're reviewing and to do that with, full respect. So they get to know the work better as well, and they get to know the practitioners better as well. And they might meet the practitioner, although I always say you are writing a review for the audience, not the artists.
Right.
And in fact, I had a reviewer, a regular reviewer for national magazines that I asked to put together 10 points on how to write a review. And then I published it, of course, in the industry pages for other people to see. And it was very clearly that I'm writing it for the audience who didn't come.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Which means, like you say, the difference between a review and a preview, and whether you're doing it for promotion or whether you're doing it for critical, not necessarily analysis, but also for archiving, right? That this is what happened in our region at that time.
Yes, and the reviewer also said you are really measuring what they have achieved against what they set out to achieve.
Right.
So that's one of the other fundamentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not comparing it to someone else.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you something, Eve. I want you to see how it matches after 15 years, night after night, late into the night. In fact, I know it was sometimes through the night. Does this match what you think you achieved? To provide self-help resource information, put people in touch with each other, invite participation in decision-making which affects our region, and keep you up to date on what's happening locally and generally highlighting the remarkable diversity and scope of arts activity in Far North.
That's virtually the mission statement, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, it was written in like the very first edition. Well, what we're claiming to be, actually, it was issue 13 in May 1995.
Yes.
So quite some time ago, by Carrie,
The
who was
arts officer at the tanks.
at the Tanks, at the council, for those that don't
Port
know.
Council.
Tanks
yeah,
Arts
Cairns
Centre
Council.
is part of the Cairns Regional Council, and it looks like you were very much in partnership with the council there all the way
I was in
through.
partnership with Carrie.
And Carrie,
Yeah.
well, it's often person
Yeah.
specific. So, do you think you achieved that? That's right back before the
Oh,
actual printing.
yes, I think we did. And I think, in fact, the economic studies that we did after and other things show the growth,
Mm.
particularly compared with other hinterlands, where like, Margaret River, Blue Mountains, Mullaney, all of those places. So they're kind of like hinterlands that quite often have an element of counterculture, which is where you get the do-it-yourself ethos, frankly. We compared economically with those regions favourably in the 10 years after the first economic study. Those economic studies are no longer done for all of far north Queensland. They are only now done for Cairns City Council.
Yeah, interesting. So you say growth. Well, actually, factually, it goes from a 4-page newsletter, the first edition, to 14 pages as you get to the preliminary sort of magazine, but printed like a newsletter. So this is called the Community Arts News, and it looks very formal with a content list and everything. Then we get to the last edition of the actual printed magazine, which was, by this stage we're talking January to March 2008 in edition 65. An amazing.
That was the last one.
Oh, it's
48 pages, is it?
48 pages of printed. Did you feel proud of each of these? Like, they're pretty amazing.
Yes. I felt good when I got one in my hand.
Oh, they look amazing. What was your choice around keeping it black and white?
Well, colour was too expensive to print.
Fair enough.
I mean, the newspaper, when I was doing stuff for the newspaper, it was black and white. Paper wasn't coloured then either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it looks, it's still got the elements of an art magazine, right?
Well, but, it's a particular genre to have black and white and to work with it well.
And work with it and know what you're doing with that format.
Because it requires a lot more contrast than colour does. I mentioned in passing about the access and touring model, and the state-based organisations who were all funded while we weren't, and the policy gap that we had to work on at both state and federal level to even get any funding, because we were not anticipated to be an organisation at the grassroots that was going to look after its own region and not be hierarchical from Brisbane. So that was all pretty challenging, and there was a particular person at Arts Queensland who said that they had to develop policy because of me, basically.
And I think that is the power.
And then federally, we had the Australia Council for the Arts touring around when they were doing some policy work and said, we just wish there was an Arts Nexus in every locale.
Yeah.
That was something they said to our board, right, when they were visiting.
Yeah.
So because we were generating activity, and when I talked about growth before, I wasn't talking about the growth of the magazine, I was talking about the economic growth, because it virtually doubled in 10 years in terms of its economic impact.
Yes.
And so of course, creative industries are under recognised as being key drivers. Yeah.
So this is the context within
in this era. Yeah.
And it is actually commented on and did a scoping study with the Australia
That
Council
was
for
the
the Arts.
one. That's when they
Yeah.
came around.
Yeah, and her work what is published, and you can see the results of that and the challenge of it. And it's just amazing that I'm really excited. I've just discovered through our conversation that what came first, the egg or the chicken. And in this case, it seems like, definitely the magazine was out there happening. You could have taken it down a commercial route. There have been attempts to do that.
There were some people who we had approaches of that kind.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that would have survived. I mean, it's the values are just core.
Yeah.
Not everyone carries those values. I mean, those values don't come. They come from experience about being a service.
Yeah.
Being of service.
Yep.
And also having the desire for that interaction, just making things happen,
Yeah.
like stirring it up.
Yeah. Well, and credit to you and those around you and that come on for the Arts Nexus
Yes.
ride that you
Yes.
were able to sustain
I wouldn't have done it without Carrie in the first place as the arts officer, who showing me the challenge and then supporting me towards when it had to become independent.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today, Eve. I really appreciate it. Now the rain stopped, of course, once we finished.
This is
And
amazing.
we will look forward to having some further chats with Eve. I
Yeah.
really want to know a bit more about your personal journey as well in the middle of that. So thank you.
Okay.